so sad for us, good citizens in our communities, to experience load shedding, having to understand ukuthi kunabogogo emakhaya ekuthi bathatha treatment ekuthi kumele ihlale bomafridgini yabo abanye babo baphila ngama oxygen. So what will happen njengabantu abanjalo, our community members ekuthi bayabhadala ne-tax but they are not experiencing ama benefits we tax in our community.
Ngifila kakhulu for ibhedlela ngoba sinabantu ukuthi baphila ngemishini abangeke basurvive makunama load sheddings. Yiyo into esibongayo ezikoleni at least kuzofundeka ngoba namhlanje siyuza ama smart board yasayuza ama chalk.
Kakhulu izibhedlela cha ngiyavuma ukuthi singacinyelwa ngoba kwamanje ama postmortem akasayenzeki ngesikhathi, idumbu ziyadileya, abantu bagcina bangcwabi idumbu ezirong ngendaba yaloko ukuthi ni load shedding kudelay ama postmortem, asikwazi nokwenza yonke into leyo. Kakhulu ibhedlela cha siyalwa kakhulu ngebhedlela. Ama police station useless kuyafana, amaphoyisa awasebenzi, ayikho into abayenzayo. Ungabiza manje bayoza after 3 hours awazi umsebenzi wabo.
Mina ngithi ku right ngoba ezibhedlela kunabantu abagulayo, ezibhedlela kunabantu abaphila ngemishini abasebenzisa ugesi. Emakhoti funeka abantu baye ekhoti kusebenza imishini, ufika uyajikiswa lapha kanti date yakho ucelile emsebenzini ilanga lakho lekhoti. Mawufika ekhoti kuthiwa imishini ilona shutdown akukhona ukusebenza, ubuyele emuva uzophinda ucele nini futhi ukuthi ubuyele lapha.
What do you make of the court's ruling that exempts essential institutions from load shedding? Uthini ngesinqumo senkantolo nesithi izibhedlela nezikole kanye nezinkatolo nezinye izikhungo ezibalulekile azingacinyelwa ugesi. Umbuzo wethu ke lo umbukeli namhlanje nizizwele ke imbono yababukeli yashiyana ngalesi sinqumo, kanti futhi lokhu sekube nomubi umthelela emnothweni wakuleli. Kungabe kuwena mbukeli kube namuphi umthelela ukunqanyulwa kokuphakelwa kagesi ngezikhathi ezithile? Siyabona emakhasini okuxhumana niyakhala ngalokhu. Bingelele sikwamukela ohlelweni i-Asikhulume Let's Talk olungonqa phambili SABC. Igama lami ngingubongiwe uMakhumalo wakwazane. Sikukhumbuze ke mbukela ukuthi ungaba ingxenye lolu hlelo ngokusishayela ucingo sizwe imbono noma imibuzo yenu. Inombolo zethu ke zithi 011-714-0677 noma 011-714-0678. Ungabuye futhi usithole kumakhasi ethu okuxhumana ku Twitter @SABC Izindaba kanye na ku Facebook SABC Izindaba. Ukuze kube lula ke mbukeli sicela uqale ngo #Asikhulume #SABC News bese ke ubhala umbuzo noma umbono wakho. Asikhulume. The Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Pordhan's department, will appeal a recent court order exempting hospitals, clinics, schools and police stations from load shedding. Ungqongqoshe obhekele wezamabhizinisi kahulumeni usenqume ukuthi uzophikisana nesinqumo senkantolo sokuthi izibhedlela, imitholampilo, izikole kanye neziteshi zamaphoyisa zingacinyelwa ugesi ngenhloso yokuwonga. Lokhu kwenzeke ngemuva kokuthi amaqembu epolitiki aphikisayo, izinyunyana zabasebenzi nezinhlangano ezimele imiphakathi bethatha lolu daba belibhekise ezinkantolo. Ngaphambi kokuthi labo basihambele ke ake sizwe ukuthi bathina abanye ababukeli ngokucinyelwa konga kukagesi kunokuba kathathu ngosuku kwezinye izindawo.
Thina ke sisebenza ngabantu esinama internet cafe, esinama shopping yana, ama small shopping yana emakhaya, senze kanjani ngoba uyathola ukuthi kwesinye isikhathi ufuna abantu bayafika bazofuna umsebenzi ukuthi ubenzela ama CVs into lapho uthola ukuthi ugesi awukho, lapho uthola imali yakuluza ngaleso sikhathi. Yena uhulumeni uzibhekelela yena yedwa, thina akasibhekeleli.
Ngiphatha kabi kakhulu ngoba ngumuntu ongaphilanga. Ma ungekho ugesi ngiyagula impela kakhulu ngoba ngiyagodola. Kakhulu. Ngingazi ukuthi fanele ngenze njani. Ma ngihleli phandle khona umoya. Ngihambe ngendlini. Fika endlini ngigodole ngoba ugesi awukho. Ngiphatha kabuhlungu impela kakhulu.
Ukuthi mangifika esibhedlela ngithola kubumnyama, nyekliniki ngithola kubumnyama, nyakuphi ngithola kubumnyama, akuklinwanga, kungcolile, kuyabheda, yonke into iyabheda lapha.
Nje thina sisebenza ngama-taxi, ekseni kumele uvuke ekseni ugeze ngamanzi abandayo. Okunye yabona njengamanje nje usuhamba kakhulu ugesi ngalendlela ukuthi noma uthi uyabuya ntambama nje oba nje uhlala wedwa kumele mhlambe uphile nge-take away. Kwesinye isikhathi uma ukuthi uyofuna mhlambe lokho kudla abanagesi akunakudla ozokudla ntamba uma ubuye emsebenzini. So iyasilimaza kakhulu nje indaba ye-load shedding ngale ndlela ukuthi asazi okumele sikwenze ngempela.
Impela bayakhala ababukeli, asamukele ihambele zethu. Mbukeli umholi wenhlangano ye-IFP umnumzane uvele enkosini ehlabisa uLV Lester ongumhlaziyi kwezikagesi nowayekade esebenza enkampanini ephehla ugesi i-Eskom nalowo okhulumela abameli abaqokiwe ukuba baselolu daba enkantolo umnumzane uSiphile Buthelezi. Sinibingelele nonke sinamukele ohlelweni. Ngizoqala ngawe bakuhlabisa. Ungqongqoshe uthi yena this particular decision he's going to appeal it. He's not going to do it because it's practically impossible. Nesithi Lokho.
Good evening, Bongiwe and the viewers. It is very unfortunate what the minister has announced to appeal the decision. A government that appeals a decision that wants to give our people a constitutional right, because as you have heard, all the people who were commenting in hospitals, in theaters, there can be no operation done during load shedding. People who live with life support machine during load shedding, they cannot survive. You go to schools in rural areas and township where you find the majority of black people. During load shedding, there can be no effective teaching. But if you go to private schools and those schools of well-to-do people, life is normal. You are creating an unequal society where the previously disadvantaged will always remain behind. Go to police stations. Police stations during load shedding, they cannot assist people. Even at night, if people can run to the police station looking for help, if it is load shedding, they can't get assistance. There's a simple thing, Bongiwe, just 1 minute. A simple thing. The court decision says, find alternative ways. Do not think inside the box, think outside the box. Look at, during COVID-19, the government mobilized 500 billion rand, let alone that they stole it, but they must mobilize money to provide generators to school, to provide diesel, even to those hospitals that do have generators. Go for solar system in areas that are fully protected through the security services.
Let me bring in Lester, because it doesn't look like where he's standing, this is something that is practically possible. Lester, there's an argument here to say put other alternative means of electricity in order to be able to assist these communities. How practical is this court ruling to be able to be implemented?
Good morning, Bongiwe. Good morning to the studio guests and to your viewers as well. I think the challenge is definitely in the practicality. So the traditional system is not designed where you have separate feeders for schools, for hospitals and or for police stations. You can certainly look at alternatives, but I don't think, given the timeline that the court has given, which is 60 days to implement these actions, that you'd be able to actually secure those kinds of alternative energies in 60 days. I think the other thing to also bear in mind is that diesel generators, although they are an alternative, their running costs become very expensive over longer periods of time. So from a sustainability perspective, I think you'd be challenged in terms of how to maintain that systems until you do have a situation you have either lower levels of load shedding or no load shedding.
So
from a network perspective, it's quite difficult.
So is it a challenge of the timeline, or is it a challenge of actually implementing this particular ruling, despite maybe the government given 3 years, would they still be able to do it? If they're given 60 days, would they still be able to do it? So is it a timeline issue or is it a capacity issue?
Well, if it's a traditional network, then it's a capacity issue. You won't be able to split those customers on the network because they're far too embedded in the network. If you're looking at alternatives like solar systems to battery PV at schools or police stations or diesel generators, I think there your challenge is going to be sustaining that ancillary cost for periods. I think that would be your challenge.
Spil, what do you say to that?
Ngibikelele ababukele emakhaya ngibikelele nakwena Bongi.
Siyabonga.
From the legal point of view, I think ilapho mina ngingakwazi ukuthi ngiphawule khona. Ngiyacabanga ukuthi inkantolo izibukile zonke izethulo zikahulumeni, yazibuka izethulo zama applicant. Inkantolo ikwazile ukuthi ibone ukuthi uhulumeni engakwazi ukuthi angayenzi load shedding kulezi ikhungo lezi azibalileyo ezibalwe inkantolo njengokucela kwalaba baye enkantolo. Okuyikole okuwama police station and okuyizikhungo zezempilo. I think kubalekile ukuthi sikubalule lokhu Bonga ukuthi lapha sikhuluma ngamalungelo avikelwe umthetho sisekelo. Namalungelo avikelwe umthetho sisekelo amanye awo awukwazi ukuthi uvele uwaphule nje. Ngenze isibonelo, ilungelo lokuphila, which is a right to life. Uma ngabe esibhedlela kumele ukuthi uhlizwe namuhla ngo10 bese kuba khona load shedding kuthiwe izoba u2 hours. Lapho sekumele ukuthi ubuye khona ugesi ngo12. Sekuqhamuka an immediate statement or a statement from Eskom notifying the citizens that load shedding has been extended or we are moving to a higher level. What then that's supposed to mean? It's supposed to mean that a hospital or a doctor that was supposed to operate on the patient ngeke asakwazi. Iqiniso lokuthi ke lo muntu uyafa. Manje umbuzo uthi ilungelo lokuphila versus ukuthi asinayo capacity noma asinayo imali ikuphi okubalekile. Ilungelo lokuphila ke elinye lamalungelo elivikeleke kakhulu kumthetho sisekelo waseNingizimu Afrika.
Just before we go for a break, there's a concern, and you listen to what the President had to say in Parliament, ukuthi this is practically impossible. Yinto engeke izikwazi ukuthi yenzeke. Nithini ngalokho niqambile IFP?
Bongiwe. It is possible for ministers and deputy ministers to be exempted from load shedding, and they also have backup system. But it becomes impossible when it comes to the voters in South Africa. This is a disgrace. When you have a government that is failing to make its citizens a first priority, that is how it responds. Let me come to the question of the timelines to procure generators. Eskom and the whole problem around electricity, there was a disaster declaration. Under disaster, you do not follow the normal procurement processes. If the government can concentrate on 60 days, how can we procure the alternative ways to ensure that these institutions run? Then running to the court is an irresponsible decision. I'm a former principal, Bongi, when my school had an enrollment of 1,200. I had to buy an engine when I was still a principal at that school. But I know a school cannot cope to run an engine on its own due to hours of load shedding. At that time, it was now and then. It is possible. This is practically possible because the court did not say Eskom must provide.
So after the break, I want us then to look at whether or not do they go back to the state of disaster, but also at the same time, there's a concern with the electricity minister and his powers, which are still up in the air right now. So I want us to look at that after the break. Babugel, agasithi shalele idolo siyabuya futhi maduzane. Sikubingelele Mbukeli kanti. If you've just joined us, we're looking at the recent court order exempting hospitals, clinics, schools and police stations from load shedding, which has been appealed by the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Pordhan. Sisahleli nehambeli zethu Mbukeli umholi wenhlangano i-IFP umnumzane Velenkosini Hlabisa, uLV Lester ongumhlaziyi wezikagesi nowayekade esebenzela enkampanini ephehla ugesi i-Eskom, nalo okhulumela abameli abaqokiwe ukuba baselolu daba ezinkantolo umnumzane uSiphile Buthelezi. Ngaphambi kokuthi siqhubeke nehambeli zethu, ake sizwe kumbukelo oselokishini laseJabulani eSoweto ngenkinga ababhekene nayo ngokucima kukagesi esiteshini samaphoyisa sakuleyo ndawo. Uthi igama lakhe asiligodle. Anonymous, siyabonga ukuthi usishayele la ku-Asikhulume. Uthini umbono noma umbuzo wakho?
Hello, yebo, mina inkinga esinayo la ukuthi uma noma ngabe siya mhlambe ema-police station siyafike sithole ukuthi i-police station ayinagesi ayina-generator. So sifuna ukwazi ukuthi kuma-situation anjengalawo senze njani, ngoba uthola ukuthi like mina ngafika e-police station sathola kwahamba ugesi se-police station sakhishelwa ngaphandle satshola ukuthi angeke siwuthole isevisi ngenxa yokuthi i-safety ye-police station iba sengcemeni. So yinkinga esinayo leyo ukuthi kwenziwa njani ukuthi nize nizobika udaba nithola ukuthi anithola usizo ngenxa ye-load shedding.
Siyabonga kakhulu, Anonymous. I'm going to bring it to you, Alvi, because this is something that, you know, this viewer is raising as a concern. She says that when she goes to her police station and there's load shedding, she's not able to get assistance, and they basically turn them away because they cannot, the police officers cannot do their work because it's dark, and they themselves then, you know, are subsequently in danger. How then does government begin to balance this? Because these are institutions that are quite critical. They do need electricity. They need a stable supply. So what then can be the measures that are put in place right now to augment this?
Need to look at is maybe a phased approach on how to actually create alternative energy sources to these institutions and facilities. I just think that given the sort of quantum of schools, police stations and hospitals, that you won't be able to address all of them simultaneously. But I think what would be appropriate is for, you know, whether it's a municipality or an Eskom supplied area, that they start to then look at how do we, in conjunction with those institutions, then look at how do we secure alternative options. I would suggest that if alternative options are considered, you know, that they look at a more sustainable way of doing it. So typically solar with a battery solution, as opposed to a diesel generator that runs diesel, which is quite costly. But I agree 100% with firstly the rationale of the judgment in that you have to provide these services. And again, even with the caller, you know, that you don't want to come to these police stations, you need help and you cannot get help. I just think it really is a matter of how do we practically implement this and how much time do you have to do that?
Okay. Shange, there's a view that says, you know, this was an overreach on the part of the courts. This case should have not even gone to the courts, and some saying that inkantolo iqhamukele. Nithi?
Cha, ngiyaphikisana nalokho. If you look at the order, the court is quite clear that it is, in as much as it is granting this judgment, it is making sure that it does not overstep the principle of separation of powers. You know, in fact, the fact that it is mentioned in the judgment, it means that the court did take that into consideration and to ensure that it does not overstep. So from the legal point of view, or from where I stand as the legal representative of the applicant, we would disagree with that. And in fact, it was put before the court and it has been made part of the judgment, just to make sure that everyone is aware that the court did take that into consideration. And also, I think it's important to note that where constitutional rights are infringed, it then justifies the judiciary to ensure or to protect the violation of those rights. It's not an overstepping. And in fact, if you argue that before the court, that will also be ventilated before the judges, that, you know, in as much as that the court can protect those rights, it will keep in mind that it does not overstep.
Babhlabisa, we've got about 40 seconds to the break, but there's something that, the president keeps talking about. He says that there's an issue of the electricity minister who sleeps, eats, dreams electricity, but he doesn't have powers right now. Can we look to this particular ministry to be able to resolve this crisis?
The IFP Bongiwe was the first, on the very same night during the SONA, to say there was no need for the minister for electricity, because up to now, he has no responsibilities that are clearly defined. All we know about him, he has become a spokesperson to tell us something that doesn't help our country. There was just no need for this ministry. The government should be taking into account the judgment as to, in this short period, talk to Treasury. What can be done? How can we mobilize money in order to fulfill a constitutional obligation? Unfortunately, we have a government that runs away from its responsibility, instead go to court to appeal what should give the constitutional right which are due to our people in South Africa. This is a shame.
And as we are going to be closing off the show, I'd like us to think about solutions as to what does this then mean. And for you, there's an appeal pending. Are you confident that you've put forward a strong case should this matter then be heard in the court? Mbukeli, ake sithi nje khumu kancane nje siyabuya. Mbukeli, sesiphetha ke sibheke izisombululo zalenkinga kagesi, kodwa ngaphambi kwalokho ake sizwe ukuthi emakhasini okuxhumana bathina ababukeli. Soqala nje ku Facebook sibone uMumbo uthi sihle kakhulu leso sinqumo ngoba kuphazamiseka ukuqulwa kwamacala enkantolo bese kuthi ezibhedlela nasemakliniki kuphazamiseka ukulashwa kweziguli kanye nemithi o imijovo ehlala emafrijini, kuphinde kufe nezingane ezikhulela emabhodleleni. Mase sicela ungahambi nogesi wama network ngoba masidinga usizo kuba nzima ukulithola ngenxa ye-network ikakhulu la emakhaya, kanti nama-battery afakwa kuma-network ayehluleka ukulekelela makuhambe ugesi. Usikhumbuzo uthi nami ngivumelana nayo inkantolo ivele nje kwakuguganga ukucishela kwezikhungo ezibalulekile nje ikakhulukazi ezibhedlela eziphethe izimpilo zabantu. Usabelo uthi kuyisinqumo esihle kakhulu, mkhulu umonakalo odaleka kulezi zikhungo ngenxa yokucishwa kogesi kuleli. Sibonga kakhulu mbukeli ukuthi uhlanganyele nathi, kodwa asizwe izisombululo zalenkinga ukuthi ngabe zibheke ngakuphi, yipi into uhulumeni angayenza manje nje sikhuluma nje ukuthi mina nawe masiya kulezi zikhungo ezibaluleke kakhulu kangaka sithole ukusizakala. Bakuhlabisa ngizoqala ngawe, yini into oyibonayo wena ukuthi ingaba isisombululo salenkinga?
Isisombululo kulenkinga Bongiwe bekungaba ukuba abantu baseningizimu neAfrika banohulumeni a decisive government who is able to make decisions and implement them. One, mobilize resources financially, set up a budget in a short-term period, provide generators into these institutions, while in a medium and a long term, you look at the issue of solar panels to ensure that you back up the grid which might be failing to cope with all these institutions. It only requires a government that is not acting against its people. All people who have made comments, they agree on one thing, that this should be done. Unfortunately, you have a government that wants to stand against its people. This is unfortunate.
For you, Alvi, what do you see as the solution here? Could a state of disaster be declared? Should it be declared once again in order to be able to assist with this? Or do you think that there are some easy wins that government could be looking at here?
No, I think you could look at it quite quickly in that, it does require a review of where the budgets have been positioned. So it might be that you redirect in the shorter term, but definitely you'd have to engage the likes of the national treasury or provincial treasuries and even in your municipal areas, your CFOs, to be able to see what's available in the budget to be able to redirect. Again, for me, we need to start looking at alternative energy solutions as opposed to saying, well, exemption from the grid sorts out the problem. But it does require collective effort for us to be able to resolve this. And I do think that there is an opportunity to review where budgets get allocated there.
And Siphile, one of the things that, of course, now happens is that you go back to court because there's this appeal process. Are you confident from where you are as lawyers that you would be able to put your best foot forward to defend your case?
From onset, when we took over this case, or when we were instructed by the applicants to represent them, we're quite confident that there are constitutional rights that are being infringed, and we're quite confident that the courts of this country will protect those critical rights as provided for in our constitution. So if we had a way, we would ask government to just appeal straight to the Constitutional Court than delaying in the lower court because these are very important constitutional rights that have been violated. So we are quite confident that we will succeed or the appeal will be dismissed. I think it's important also to note that the appeal has not been launched yet. It was just a statement, and we are hoping that the South African government, the Minister of Public Enterprise, would get good legal counsel and not proceed with the appeal. Instead, utilize the resources to implement the court judgment within the 60 days.
Baklabisa, in about 10 seconds, when it comes to the importance of, speaking in one voice, we're seeing the Minister of Electricity, we're seeing the Energy Minister, we're seeing the Public Enterprises Minister, seemingly reports suggesting that there's tensions there. How important will it be for these three to correlate?
The president should not have created a problem of adding a ministry over the two. He should have dissolved the other ministries if they are not effective and have one ministry of electricity to deal with the problem. This again tells you an indecisive government will compound the problem, buy time, spend resources, and not concentrate on the problem.
Let me thank you all for your time. Do appreciate it. Mbukeli, inkinga kagesi eNingizimu Afrika ngathi kusekude ukuthi ixazululeke kodwa sisazoqhubeka siqaphe ukuthi konke kuhamba kanjani. Sibonge kugini babukeli nokuthi nibe nathi kanye nezivakashi zethu umholi wenhlangano ye-IFP uMnumzane uVelenkosini Hlabisa, uLV Lester ongumhlaziyi kwezikagesi nowayekade esebenza enkampanini ephehla ugesi i-Eskom nalowo okhulumela abameli abaqokiwe ukuba base lolu daba ezinkantolo uMnumzane uSiphile Buthelezi uMakhumalo kaZwane kanye nethimba le Asikhulume Let's Talk sithi axabene.